We're going to spend the first 5 minutes looking at two women who are like really prevalent, changing the space, the psychedelic space today, and then we're going to move on and do like a cross-analysis of three female psychonauts, three female writers. So let's get into it. Breathe. Remember to breathe, guys. So what is a psychedelic feminist, and what role will they play in our world today? So let's look at some of the thought leaders. We have Zoe Helene, who is an artist and cultural activist. She coined the phrase psychedelic feminism, and she also has an environmental advocacy group called Cosmic Sister. You should check it out, it's great. She invites women from all different backgrounds, all professions, to submit written pieces. And of the few selected, you're taken on a psychedelic retreat to the Amazon to work with indigenous healers. I guess with Zoe Helene, she's all about a true balance of power across the gender spectrum, and she believes this is the only way that humans and non-humans will survive. So when we think about advocacy programs like Cosmic Sister, we have to ask how is it impacting a wider culture? So hold that question in your mind while we go through this. Zoe also believes that psychedelic feminism is a realistic and practical, hopeful approach to a much-needed shift in global consciousness. And lastly, women's empowerment through intentional work with sacred plants, as you can see here, is the way to jumpstart a rapid cultural evolution. Second woman who we're going to look at is Maria Sabina. You might have been to some of her talks today. So she's an accredited counsellor and psychotherapist. She has an essay called Femtheogenic Consciousness, where she talks about the deep sources of wisdom within the archetypal feminine. She believes the exile of femtheogenic consciousness has alienated us from ourselves, each other, nature, and our link to what we once knew as the Animus Monday, or the world soul, leading us to a deep imbalance and a crisis that is both collective and individual. So it's clear that Zoe and Maria they have the same aim, and it's to just balance out this connection between Earth and humanity. These are our three female psychonauts: Charlotte Brontë, Maria Sabina, and Anaïs Nin. But what are the behavioural traits of a psychedelic feminist? Can anyone shout anything out? Anything you think embodies a psychedelic feminist? Just a guess, anyone?
Bravery.
Bravery, yeah, brilliant. Anything else? Yeah, totally. So all three of these women were exactly that. They were rebellious, they were transgressive, they were clearly making their own way in the world. And examples of that really come to light with the fact that they all ascended in male-dominated fields. They had a deep appreciation for nature, and they all, how do I say this? They all, regardless of whether they were going to be ostracized from society or with the threat of leading a companionless life, they lived their true self. For example, Anaïs Nin, she lived a very bohemian lifestyle with Henry Miller in Paris. She had many lovers. This was very unconventional for a woman growing up in the sort of early 20th century. And then we had Charlotte Brontë, who she actually rejected the man that she eventually married. And then Sabina, she said, I don't need a man, I can work for myself. And eventually she did marry. It was the way of the world, right? Not that there's anything bad about marriage, I'm not saying that, but clearly these women, this reluctance to marry speaks to a truth that they were very, very hyper-aware of the unequal constraints that were placed on women at the time. And this sort of reluctance and intelligence just speaks to that. Let's delve a little bit deeper into, the GIF works, amazing. Delve a bit deeper into our female writers. So Anaïs Nin, I love this picture. She was known for throwing lavish parties, and the theme for this party was "Come as your madness." So interpret what you will from the whole head in the cage thing. But she was a French essayist, French-Cuban essayist, novelist, writer of erotica. Her novels are titled Spy in the House of Love, House of Incest. She didn't receive much success with her novels early on in life, so she began writing erotica, which, as you can imagine, was super unconventional for a woman in the 40s, 50s. She was an advocate of psychoanalysis, a patient of Otto Rank, and she was also a colleague of Freud, so she moved in those kinds of circles. She wasn't really acclaimed until her first volume of diaries were released in 1966, and by this point she was in her 60s. We're actually going to be studying one of her diaries today, the fifth volume, and right at the end she takes some LSD, and it's just a really interesting account, so we're going to be dissecting that passage. Then we have Charlotte Brontë. She was a British poet and writer. These poems here, this was kind of an act of rebellion, I guess. She had two sisters called Emily and Anne, and together they self-published and self-financed this poetry book. And as you can see, they had to give themselves pseudonyms, so Cora Ellis and Acton Bell, and I think they got a little kick out of keeping their first initials handy there. But Charlotte Brontë wrote things such as Jane Eyre and Villette, and we're actually going to be looking at a passage from the end of Villette where the protagonist Lucy Snow is given this opiated sleeping potion, but it kind of has the opposite effect, and she goes on this wild transcendent journey throughout the park of Villette. Then we have Maria Sabina, who we all know. She was a Mazatec healer and shaman, primarily worked with psilocybin mushrooms. What's super interesting about her is, by Western standards, she hadn't really received a proper education. She couldn't read or write, yet she could articulate these incredible poems. So we're actually going to look at one of her poems today that she would read at mushroom ceremonies. Okay, so what do their experiences have in common? I've broke it down into two topics. So first is the personification of the other. The second is water and moon as femtheogenic consciousness. So, Anaïs and LSD experience. Typically, when we take psychedelics, we might experience an outer-body experience, or maybe, I don't know, we feel a sort of separateness to our own body. And this certainly happens for Anaïs. While she's doing LSD, this comic spirit appears to her. She calls it the comic spirit of Anaïs. And whenever this spirit speaks, it's usually to reveal some kind of strange philosophical wisdom. And it reminds me of Terence McKenna's Machine Elves, how they kind of spoke to him, and he said they were this kind of speaking entity of the tryptamine realm, or this manifestation of wisdom, or the logos, which is the source of all knowledge. One point I want to make about Anaïs is she was very good at delving into her subconscious through her writing, but I want to just distinguish the two, because the unconscious and the subconscious aren't the same. So the subconscious mind is the storage point for any memories needed for quick recall, so like what you have for breakfast, or like, did I let the cat out this morning? And the unconscious is where our memories, past experiences reside, so any traumas or many good memories held there. Back to Anaïs. Yeah, no, I think that's all I wanted to say about her. Yes, this was it, sorry. So, with the Machine Elves, they're also reminiscent of Jung and the Kabiri. Has anyone heard of the Kabiri? Anyone know these? Okay, so that's great. Jung had this ability to delve into his unconscious with no psychedelics. He was like the master of delving between different states. And he talks about these entities, much like the Machine Elves, much like this comic spirit, these kind of sources of wisdom. In his Red Book in 1940, he said, "The Kabiri are the mysterious creative powers, the gnomes that work under the earth, i.e. below the threshold of consciousness, in order to supply us with lucky ideas. As imps and hobgoblins, however, they also lay all sorts of nasty tricks, keeping back names and dates that were on the tip of the tongue. So interesting. Has anyone experienced the Kabiri here? Raise your hand if you have. I definitely have. Hopefully it won't happen today. So then we move on to Charlotte Brontë. So she, under the umbrella of personification of the other, she kind of, instead of this sort of physical manifestation coming to her, she personifies her imagination as this subconscious imagination. So she says, imagination was roused from her rest and she came forth impetuous and venturous. So again, there's this sense of like wild, impish unpredictability. It involves sort of the same characteristics as these machine elves. And that rolling R sound, that alliteration, it kind of has this raring to go restlessness. Sabina, with the personification of the other, she says, I am a saint woman, I am a spirit woman, I am an atmosphere woman, I am a day woman. The personification of the other is quite different here. She doesn't see it as a physical manifestation. She doesn't see it as a voice that speaks in her head. It's almost like she's more concerned with not identity as a single entity, but as a thing that is fluid. And this repetition of the I am is called anaphora, and typically we see it in biblical psalms. And so it has this kind of religious quality to it. On the one level, if I was going to interpret this, on the one level, is Maria Sabina speaking about our sort of preoccupation with ego, labels, I am this, I am that. But on the collective level, she's speaking from a place of fluidity. Maybe is she saying that at different chapters of our lives, we all have a responsibility to play these different roles. And it kind of reminds me of a phrase in Lakesh Alakim, which is a famous mind saying, roughly translates to, I am the other you. So is she saying that within you, there is part of me? Possibly, I don't know, I'm just throwing this out there, but I feel like this sort of fluid identity and the recognition of our similarities rather than our differences can only serve to benefit all. So topic 2, water and moon as femtheogenic consciousness. Back to Anaïs Nin's experience with the LSD. She says, the comic spirit of Anaïs was aware of Gil's predicament. So Gil is the friend that's brought her to this psychotherapist's clinic to do the LSD. And the comic spirit says, poor Gil, you're out with an ordinary weepy female. What a ridiculous thing to spoil a voyage through space by weeping. But before we go on, I want to explain why women weep. It's the quickest way to rejoin the ocean. You liquefy, become fluid, flow back into the ocean where the colours are more beautiful. So the sea, this connection between the sea and women has sort of long history of cross currents in Judeo-Christian thought, natural scientific epistemology. And is this comic spirit kind of admitting to Nin, I am your unconscious speaking to you? Potentially. But why is Nin crying? Clearly she is uncomfortable with being in this space of vulnerability, not only in front of her friend Gil and the psychotherapist, but maybe being vulnerable even towards herself. What Nin fears most is being branded as this sort of 20th century stereotypical woman, weak, vulnerable, damsel in distress. She holds herself to this higher standard of individualism. Because if you know anything about Anaïs, she's from her promiscuity to her career, to her ideas, she was anything but this kind of straight-laced, stereotypical 20th century woman. And it was Jung who said, the sea is the favourite symbol for the unconscious, the mother of all that lives, which just goes to support the idea that she's experiencing this ocean of her own unconscious with this comic spirit. Yeah, I know you can see King Kong, typical damsel in distress image right there. So when we talk of tears are they supposed to be this sort of harbinger of change? Well, Clarissa Pinkola certainly thinks so. She says that tears are a river that takes you somewhere. Tears lift your boat off the rocks, off dry ground, carrying you down river to someplace better. With Brontë, so she experiences this kind of fluid sense of water and the moon, and this voice that's speaking in her head tempts her outside, and when she ventures into the night, it says she drank in the elastic night air. So that metaphor, that drank, again, does it speak of kind of psychedelics and nature's ability to hydrate the soul, hydrate the spirit? And then with the word elastic, it makes me think of that which is sort of hardened by day, by the light of day, becomes this fluid, flexible entity by night. Again, she talks of the moon. She showed me the moon supreme in an element deep and splendid. This is kind of reminds me of paganism a little bit and moon worship. So there are a lot of crossovers between paganism and psychedelics in the sense that pagan ritual, psychedelic ritual, both are used to enter these kind of altered states of consciousness in a way to kind of honor nature. And maybe can they be used to kind of reawaken this yearning for nature so that when we come to our ordinary state of mind, we bring a piece of that with us. With Sabina and her Veladas, she says, I am crying woman, I am moon woman. So she's not ashamed of crying at all. In fact, she owns it, she celebrates it. And this anaphora from the I am changes to they say. So they say it's like softness there. They say it's like land. They say it's like day. They say it's like dew. So why does this anaphora change? And who is they? Is this the Kabiri again, the machine elf, speaking through Sabina? The simplicity of her sentences is also really important. It's almost as if she's drawing attention to the simple beauties of every day. For example, the word dew, when we think of that, it's this kind of natural phenomenon that occurs every day, and it shows up unconditionally, and it's this kind of bringer of sustenance and nourishment, this kind of humble and unassuming version of rain. So brings me back to this question. What is a psychedelic feminist and what role do they play? So with regards to our three writers, Anaïs has a little reflection here, and I'm actually I love Anaïs, but I'm really upset with her reflection. She says, the chemical did not reveal an unknown world, it shut out the quotidian world as an interference and leaves you alone with your dreams and fantasies and memories. I feel like that's really subjective. And I also think there was a sense of threat. She had this huge ego, she was this big personality, and I think she realized the power of LSD and saw that it enabled people to kind of delve into their subconscious, whereas Nin could access it offhand. I think she maybe felt a sense of threat that other people would be able to do exactly as she did. Because when she discussed it with Huxley, he says, you're fortunate enough to have a natural access to your subconscious life, but other people need drugs and should have them. Another little reflection from her here. So what has happened that people lose contact with such images, visions, and have to resort to drugs which ultimately harm them? Again, it's like, I don't understand. She was just unconventional in every sense of the word. And then when it comes to her reflection on LSD, she's this sort of straight-laced kind of, what is she? Pardon? Sorry, I didn't hear that. Yeah.
Do you feel like maybe she didn't have a proper sort of framework to integrate an LSD experience, so she might have sort of benefited to write about it, but also had a bad ending and didn't integrate?
Yeah, possibly. Yeah. No, that's true.
I don't know.
Yeah, I just think, no, I think you're exactly right.
When is she moved
when did she live? So it's like she was born at the turn of the 19th century, 20th century. So this would have been like in the 50s that she would have been trying this. But I think you're right, like she has no way to sort of integrate it, even though she was in a psychotherapist's clinic. Maybe she was afraid to kind of discuss it anymore. Maybe she just talked about it in a diary. I'm not sure whether she kind of spoke about it with her friends. But yeah, I just feel like that she's not like a well-traveled cosmic voyager, but yet she has such a strong opinion that kind of parrots this, like a naughty mother, like you shouldn't be doing psychedelics, etc.
She's almost kind of saying, it's almost like she can't understand how people can lose their psychic life in the first place. She just, I don't know her history really, so I don't know if she suffered loads of trauma in her own life, but she doesn't seem to maybe empathise with that at all, and that you could access kind of this psychic life that a lot of people have just shut off, that she has access to really easily.
Yeah.
I mean, in many ways she was quite fortunate to have all that time to reflect, like reading her diaries, it's all she did.
Yep.
Fantasizing about Henry all the time, or other men, and reflecting on her life. And I find it really interesting that you mentioned that she had a huge ego, because that's always been in the back of my head, and it's been a resistance. I love her work, but it's also been a bit of a pushback against her, of like, she's very concerned with her experiences.
She was young, like other men get to indulge in this.
Yeah, that's so true.
Like we just don't have many women who have that vast material that they've written down.
Sure. Yeah, no, I think you're right, and she's definitely very fortunate to have had the time and the privilege to write these 6 huge volumes of diaries. And she did have a kind of traumatic childhood, so maybe that is something to do with it as well. Yeah. Last bit of Anaïs Nin, which I love this quote. So she said, doing LSD is a solitary vice, a passive dreaming which alienates the dreamer from the whole world, isolates him, ultimately destroys him. It's like masturbation. Well, I don't know anyone who's destroyed themselves through masturbation, but maybe you guys do. And when she's talking about it, like it alienates the dreamer, if you read her whole account of the LSD experience, she kind of sees sacred geometry and the pyramids and all this stuff that like is quite common in psychedelic trips. When she unpicks it, she says that, you know, she's been lucky enough to kind of live in different countries and actually have those experiences, like seeing the pyramids or living in Bali and listening to birdsong, or feeling the sun on her skin and feeling golden. And she relives that through her LSD trip. So this is again why she maybe understands it as a passive dreaming, because she felt that, well, the LSD experience was just me kind of reliving those things that I already could understand and wrote about in that way, because I can access my subconscious, potentially. But yeah, it's cool. Yeah, so just to the conclusion, psychedelic feminism blend creates space to spark new narratives. Where exploring the feminine unconscious is no longer considered taboo, but welcomed and celebrated. Of course, when you have a psychedelic trip, it's very intense, it's very emotive, and really it reveals to us the importance of plants and their role in our lives as teachers. The lessons learned in a cosmic voyage cannot be taught at school from a book or from a Wikipedia page. I don't know whether anyone disagrees with that. No? Okay. And lastly, a psychedelic lesson strikes a chord, shakes you up, forces you to pay attention. It's numinous, playful, and deeply personal. So, thank you very much.